Eye of the Tiger and half don't. And those who listen to Eye of the Tiger close more sales calls. Yep. It's amazing. It's amazing, right? But there's a power to that song that has more to do with the vibe, the attitude, the feeling, which is why it's so encouraging to me that we can all talk like music, even if we're not grade A lyricists. Because at the end of it, talking like music is really just about opening the spigot on your feelings and your emotions. And when you're angry, speaking with anger. And when you're happy, speaking with joy. So you see, the fundamental mechanism of inspiration works through these things called our mirror neurons. Okay. These scientists in Parma, Italy, and like, wouldn't it be amazing to work in Parma, Italy? Like the lunches would be outrageously good. But anyway, these scientists in Parma, Italy, about 15 years ago, discovered mirror neurons. And those are the neurons in our brain that help us learn by replicating what we see in the world. So a baby sees her mother's mouth move, mirror neurons fire, baby's mouth move, baby learns how to speak. But what's so amazing is that just the last few years, we've discovered that mirror neurons don't just replicate, don't just mirror behavior, they mirror emotions. So when you see somebody sad, you feel sad. When you see Steph Curry locked in and intense, your body feels locked in and intense. I mean, emotions transfer. Some people call these Gandhi neurons. They're literally the things that help us share our feelings, that make us empathetic. So at heart, the way music works, the way inspiration works, is by transferring that feeling. The words matter less than the mood, than the tone of a sad country song or an angry punk rock song. You hear those noises and your body responds. Here's the kicker. There's one thing that breaks that magic spell, and it is thinking. It is analysis. It is your prefrontal cortex. These amazing scientists who are on the cutting edge of this at UCLA have done this study where they hooked up the brains of sports fans watching their favorite teams. And that experience is a lot like inspiration. It's reptilian brain, it's turned on, it's emotional, it's mirror neurons firing, and all of that disappears. All of that disappears the second color commentary and play-by-play analysis begins. Analysis paralysis is a real neurological condition, and it's the greatest obstacle to people being stoked. When you get people thinking, reasoning, arguing, bullet pointing, rationalizing, you stick them in place. So for me, at the heart of my book is this simple equation. It's called the inspiration equation, and it is passion minus reason. You've got to be passionate. You've got to transfer that emotional energy that wants to arouse people to do things. But you've also got to shut off the thinky part of their brain. You've got to extract just enough reason from that situation that they're all go, and not think.
That's awesome.
I hope so.
No,
I hope it's true.
Yeah. So I mean, you're leading large accounts. You're speaking to boardrooms of those among us, present company included, that tend to overanalyze things.
Totally.
Especially from through an operational lens. How have you successfully managed to break that cycle to get some of these like great campaigns that you've led?
Well, I mean, one of the great ironies of today is that we've all read the books that explain how our brains work, right? We know we blink, we know we're nudged, we know System 1 is an unconscious, emotional, irrational monster that really drives all of our decisions. And especially those of us in marketing tell this to our clients all the time. You need to be emotional if you want to move people. And yet the way in which we do that is so darn rational. We show up with decks and logic and argument and data and PowerPoint and bullet points, and it's the great irony, I think, of marketing, that in trying to get clients to be bolder and braver, we tend to approach them like robots. So the first thing to do is just to know it. And then to be passionate and to extract reason. I would never, if I were presenting a great creative idea or a great creative campaign to a client today, the very last thing I would do is some sort of strategic setup. Right? Why would you get them in a mode of thinking and analyzing and rationalizing and interrogating your data at exactly the moment you want them to feel something? But by all means, do a strategic follow-up. Say, this is how we think it works, but give your clients, give your partners a moment to feel your thinking instead of hightailing them to a place where they're interrogating and analyzing it. That's how we won Arby's, actually. We presented We Have the Meats. We got them really excited by what they could be as a brand. And then we explained how we thought it would work in the marketplace. But they were already hooked. They were already hooked. They bought it.
Right on. Okay, so I got a couple more questions, but as you've been listening, if there's anything that you're starting to kind of formulate your questions, please do so. So in writing your book, so we kind of touched a little bit on this when we were kind of doing our pre-interview. The art of writing.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that experience for you as a first-time author.
Right.
What were some of the challenges? Let's start
Good
there.
question. I've always loved writing. 7th grade, heart crushed, poured myself into terrible poetry, learned to love the Smiths. I've always loved writing, but ad agencies do this weird thing to some of us, which is they say, well, you're not creative, you're creative. So I always thought, well, I'm a fine expository writer, but I can't really write in a way that moves people because I'm not a creative. And so much of the experience of writing this book was taking that stupid institutional bias and trashing it. So I had to, in some way, convince myself that I was creative, which meant writing a whole lot of garbage that I'd throw out just to kind of get going. I mean, the final book is about 75,000 words. I probably wrote 3 times that, and I think that's just the process. But I think what I learned is that any one of us can write an amazing 30-page book. I mean, I thought my outline would take me 220 pages, and I thought it was good and solid, and my agent liked it, and a publisher liked it enough to give me money for it. And I sat down, and I went through my outline, and I was at page 30. What now? And I guess it's a wall, it's a block that a lot of people hit. And at least for me, the way that I contended with that moment was by talking to people. So I found this amazing neuroscientist at UCLA, Dr. Marco Iacoboni, and I sent him an email, and he became a friend and a source of wisdom. He introduced me to a neuroscientist at SMU who's a jazz musician, and we talked a long time about music. And I talked to Mark Fitzloff, who is the chief creative officer on Nike for about 15 years. And in talking to people, you suddenly realize that the burden of having 200 pages of ideas does not fall on your shoulders. There's an amazing world out there filled with ideas, and if you could just be the person who connects that idea to this idea, then maybe, hopefully, you're adding some value in chapter 6. Yeah.
Right.
But I also, I mean, it's funny in thinking about it, and I didn't intend to do this, but I wrote different parts of the book in different places.
Okay.
So the more sort of academic, sciencey stuff, I wrote at the U.
Okay.
When I wanted to be sort of artsy and fartsy, there's a gorgeous little library at MIA, the art museum we're lucky to have. When I felt like I was getting too pretentious, I'd just go to the Linden Hills Public Library and write there. So I sort of tried to put myself in places where the vibe and the energy and the people of that place would kind of direct my writing a little bit.
And what kind of music were you listening to while writing?
It's a really good question because I have a very specific answer.
Okay.
I hate this band.
Okay.
But I knew from the beginning I wanted this book to feel like listening to Coldplay. And I just, I mauled on a steady diet of Coldplay for a year and a half. Because I thought they were like fun and generous and populist, and that's sort of the feeling I wanted my book to have. Because I knew the instinct of mine to get sort of nerdy and pretentious was strong. I wanted to counteract that with some lovely Chris Martin-ness. Sorry, that's stupid now that I say it out. It's like,
No, but you know what? It totally makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're having this chat.
So, okay, so when you started, it was a very different time in the industry, right? What advice, based on the experiences from writing the book and your own career, would you give someone first about to graduate, heading into the industry, or someone who's been there for a while and trying to move into that next level?
I've always had two pieces of advice for people breaking into advertising that were given to me by my mentor. And the first is, what matters more than the place where you work is the person for whom you work. Find an amazing mentor, which doesn't mean somebody brilliant. It means somebody brilliant who has the time to spend with you. You know, in some of my management roles, I was a terrible mentor because I couldn't invest in the awesome team that I had. But it's so important to work with someone who has the disposition, the time, the capacity to help you grow and learn and develop. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, you know, everybody rushes to work at the sexiest ad agencies out there. They're sexy for a reason. They do great work, but just find one thing you love about the agency and your set. And it could be one body of work they've done. It could be some of the people there. It could be the office space. You've just got to be able to very clearly identify the thing you love about the place to which you will go morning after morning after morning, because that'll sustain you. So those have always been my two pieces of advice. I think in the last couple of years, I would add a third, which is it's really important at a time when ad agencies in particular are under such siege and duress. There are sort of storm clouds gathered around them, and fees are being cut and energy is being sapped. It's so important to be at a place that clients love and support. Right, because that place has got no chance in hell to be a great ad agency if it doesn't have clients who are on its side. And that sounds so easy, but as you know, most clients have a really tough time in an environment where growth is really hard to come by, being exuberant champions of their agencies, being fans of their agencies. And it comes out in all sorts of ways. You know, compensation is certainly one of them, but also the disposition. You need clients who believe in you enough to let you soar and let you crash.
First question.
I like what you're saying about a client who gives you permission to soar and then crash, because what's going to happen is perhaps the Dos Equis example was the soaring. Can you provide one that, what does crash look like, either for you personally or something you've seen in the industry?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You know, for every great marketing campaign I've been lucky to be associated with, there are 10 stinkers. And they're not stinkers because they're epic fails with terrible cultural backlash, like the recent Gillette thing that I think was sort of unfairly maligned. They're stinkers because they're just ignored. They're ho-hum, and maybe a marketing mix model says, yeah, sales of Lipton tea are sort of on track, but they don't actually make any ripple or make any effect in the marketplace. I do remember a time that was a particular, for me personally, low point. We were launching a brand new company, which was going to be the largest telecommunications company in the universe. It was going to be a company called Verizon. But we didn't have the name yet, or you didn't have the name yet. We at the agency knew what it was going to be called. And oh man, I was so clever, I thought, right? My insight was that the world of telecommunications was so loud and noisy and political and competitive, and this plan at this price and this coverage over here, and wouldn't it be so refreshing if a communications company launched itself into the world based on the very simple insight that there is great power in shutting up, in being quiet. I remember I did these focus groups around the country, and I asked everybody, tell me about your best phone call ever. And almost to a person, it was a phone call in which they had heard something, not said something. I heard I was pregnant. I heard my son was coming home for Christmas. I heard the tumor was benign. I thought, holy cow, the magic of communications comes when we shut up. So I wrote this brief that I loved, which was all about the power of silence. And coming from Verizon, this was going to be amazing. And the creatives got it, and they were excited about it. And one of the creatives had this idea, which was a brief that was all about peace and quiet, might have some connection to a company whose name begins with a V. And he made the sort of Verizon peace connection in his brain. And sort of before I knew it, we were shooting a multi-million-dollar TV campaign in Times Square in New York with like punk rockers and Hasidic Jews passing each other on the sidewalk, giving them each other the peace sign, the V sign. And it was, it was terrible. It was such a sort of bastardization of my own cleverness. And at the time, it was so easy for me to point to this creative crew and go, they screwed it up. They messed it up. No, they didn't. I did, right? This was my responsibility to work with them, and I just didn't figure out how to do that in a way that was really effective. When creative stinks, either because it's an epic fail or it's just ignored, it's generally a problem with everybody on the team, not somebody on the team. And in that case, I was part of the everybody who moonwalked away too quickly.
I'm curious how these ideas about winning with reason and getting strokes, how do you make sure that you're using them for good and not for evil?
I
And
know.
in today's political climate?
You're so right. You're so right. Everything about inspiring can be used for good and can be used for bad. And as I say in the book, just don't be bad. and I wish I had a better answer than that, but I really don't. I mean, the similarities between the campaign Obama ran and the campaign Trump ran are frighteningly similar. They both had a way of framing things in really epic terms. They both had their own way of being poetic and lyrical, and I sort of shudder at saying that, but Make America Great Again is sort of, I think, insidious nationalist poetry, but there's a poetry to it. I mean, I really think if we're going to take down Trump, we can't do it unless we, the candidate, the party, the people, the country, muster a way of arousing people's emotions. And that gets to deep and dangerous places.
How are you selling work today versus 10 years ago or even 5 years ago?
How am I what?
How are you selling like strategies?
Oh, I don't do that anymore. I don't work at an ad agency today.
How were you?
Well, I do think that the thing I mentioned earlier, I've come to be a real believer in. The worst thing you can do, the worst thing you could do in trying to sell an idea that you believe is bold and brave is to pave the path toward that idea with logic and reason. So one of the creators of PowerPoint said the goal in creating that program, that software, was to give power to the bullet points. Right? I mean, how terrifying is that? Right? But we have millions of people in conference rooms all around the world who have internalized that. And they think an idea is only as good as the number of bullet points beneath it. But ironically, that very approach is the thing that gets people arguing. I know when I was at General Mills and an ad agency came in to present to our team, they were hosed the moment they started showing us perceptual maps. Because suddenly, my client colleagues, who were awesome people, have something to argue with. Well, should that be the axis or should it be this? Have you thought about that? Oh, you just gave me a number, but have you looked at this number? It's what the NBA brain thrives on, eats for breakfast. Don't feed it. Don't feed it. Force people to feel. And you'll get an honest reaction. They might not like what you have, but that's cool. I'd rather them hate something we as an agency are presenting than sort of reason it to death.
I apologize for arriving late, so I don't know if you talked about your college education, but I was looking on LinkedIn and I see you had Victorian Studies.
I
How did that
did.
inform your career with the studies?
Yeah, lots of arguments with my parents. Yeah. So I went to this amazing all-boys Catholic high school that was about as strict and conservative as a place can be, and I loved every moment of it. But I knew when I got to college I wanted a very different experience, and I found my way to Vassar College. Got my college reunion next weekend. I can't wait. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to study. I thought politics, which had always been my passion. But in my first year, I took a whole variety of classes. And as it turns out, the professors who I loved the most were in different departments, but they all had the 19th century in common, an art history professor, an English professor. And I could care less what these people were teaching. I just wanted to study with these people. And luckily, Vassar had a Victorian studies program. Like they had a Renaissance studies and a classical studies program. And I was like, sure, just sign me up for that. That sounds great. And in hindsight, I think it was the perfect training to be a marketing strategist in the 21st century, because the approach is fundamentally cultural and interdisciplinary. I mean, you can't really understand the novels of Dickens without understanding the Industrial Revolution. You can't really understand 1990s hip hop without understanding the socioeconomic situation in which it's created. That we've got to start looking at everything cross-culturally and being turned on by those currents. And I know that sounds like such a canned answer to explain my Victorian studies degree, but in hindsight, the skills I learned of making far-flung connections between different fields has been useful. Yeah. And I love the Victorian era. I mean, come on, it's so good. It's so good. Yep.
I want to go back to what you were talking about right at the beginning, improv.
Yes.
And I love what you said about leading with emotion, following strategy. But when you were in pitching work, is there a degree of improv to what you're doing? Or are you very planned to go into a boardroom?
So I was on the debate team in high school and college, and they're very different animals. In high school debate, you get your topic a week beforehand and you write out your first speeches, and then in the course of the debate, you respond to your opponent. In college debate, you get the topic 10 minutes before you've got to start talking. So it is very improvisational. And when I went into politics and then advertising, I thought those were skills that would serve me well. I could sort of show up and I was lucky to work with John Steele, who is the father of account planning, or one of them, who worked at Goodby Silverstein forever, just brilliant. And I was shocked to see that the way John would work, who is brilliant, the way he would work is that he would write out word for word everything he planned to say in a pitch meeting. And he would practice it and practice it and practice it. And I was like, John, you don't need to do that. You could stand on your feet and talk for 20 minutes in such a compelling manner. And he said a few things. He said he felt like he owed it to his teammates to be clear and predictable, right? In a meeting where different people have different levels of improv skills, a sense of certainty about what their partner, what their colleague is going to do and say is the right and generous thing to do. But he also said, but everybody who practices anything says it's only when you practice that you could really set yourself up for good improv. So the more you know your script, the more you could go off of it. C:"Veep, right? It's amazing when people have a script, how they can play and distort and permutate that script. So I got to a point where I would write out just about word for word everything I planned to say in a pitch. The problem with improv, and I recommend improv in my book, I do, as a way of getting people who are uncomfortable standing up in front of audiences, because it's become a cultural thing that people sort of accept and know, and they know the rules of, and it's just great practice. What it isn't is comedy. The only reason people laugh at improv is because it's a release of nervous tension. What's going to happen? Ah, ha, ha. But again, no one ever rewatches improv and goes, that was a great joke, because they're not.
And that's where the debate team.
Maybe. Yeah, sure. Hi.
So I guess similarly, I started in politics and
Oh, great.
got into design and advertising.
What did you do?
I own a small digital.
In politics, what did you do?
I was a policy analyst in the North Carolina legislature.
Oh, that's real stuff.
Yeah,
That's government, that's not politics.
Yeah, it was trying to figure out how to get a Democratic bill passed in a Republican supermajority where everybody hated you because you were Democrat.
Right.
Yeah. all
Right.
sorts of fun.
Were those John Edwards days?
No, post Edwards.
Okay.
So I guess you said something that kind of resonated, but I'm kind of curious, like how to extrapolate that. So, like politically, I relied heavily on data, but then of course you end up making the emotional play. But
Right.
you ended up saying something about getting people to do something, and then they follow.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, like how, in like a pitch setting, or when you're trying to lay out this really out there idea that you think might end up being good, but you know, 9
Right.
times out of 10 they're just gonna say no, that's just too out there.
Yes.
How do you end up leading them into a place where they're starting to do something? And
Right.
You can kind of set it up to where they're just gonna follow
Right.
through and think that maybe they came up with the idea, or it just kind of resonates.
Right. A few things. It's a great question. Thank you for it. I am all for being rational and logical and reasonable in figuring out what you want to accomplish, what you believe is right. My point, though, is that once you get there, to mobilize people, those very virtues that got you to the truth are the ones that will get in the way of progress, right? So I'm not saying be an idiot. I'm saying when it comes time to moving people, to executing, to mobilizing, reason and logic are speed bumps. One of the great skills of being inspiring is the ability to delusionalize ambitions. People aren't inspired to do small things. It doesn't stir. It doesn't short circuit the prefrontal cortex the way the grand and the epic things do, right? David doesn't want to fight somebody who's his size. David wants to fight Goliath. And when that happens, we who are evolutionary predisposed to love underdogs because we're fundamentally empathetic people, we lean in. We're on the side of people who scale the highest cliffs, who tilt at the biggest windmills. A political example, Al Gore said he wanted to reduce carbon emissions 20%. He lost. Barack Obama said he wanted to lower the tide of the ocean. He won. And not just because of that, but again, he had a way of framing things in epic and grand ways. So it's very important if you want to inspire people to set delusional ambitions, things that seem almost impossible. But once you do that, you can't leave people stranded. You've got to give them what I call the inspiration, the very first step, the very next baby step that they've got to take on the way to reach that delusional ambition. Because again, when you change people's behavior, everything else follows. Another political example, given your background, what the Obama campaign is famous for getting digital right. The way in which they used digital was really clever and influenced by behavioral psychology. So traditionally, when campaigns would canvass, go door to door, they'd say, are you gonna vote for a guy? Oh, yes, you are. Thank you. See you soon. And they'd leave. What the Obama campaign realized is that you increase the likelihood those people who will vote for you will vote for you if you get them to articulate their plan for doing so. When will you do it and where will you do it? I'll drop the kids off at school and then I'll go do it at the library. Just getting people to articulate that increase the likelihood they will follow through and vote for you twofold. So yeah, on the one hand, you want to lower the tide of the ocean. You want to make history. You want to erase the cardinal sin of American history. On the other hand, you're going to do it after you get your Starbucks at the fire department. And it's the combination of those two things, delusional ambitions and real small step actions, that really mobilizes people. It's all the messy stuff in the middle. Well, should we reduce carbon emissions 20% or maybe 15%? That's when you get into trouble. Does that make sense? There are 4 more skills of inspiration in my book, which is available for pre-order at Amazon.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Maybe you can preview one of those skills for me since I'm a data-driven marketer.
Yeah.
Inspiration, please. Give me one more time.
You don't have a hard time with inspiration. That's the good thing. So people go, oh, I'm very data-driven, I'm very logical, I'm very rational. This might work for Nike, but does it work in business to business or this trade or that? Or how do you move scientists? The amazing thing about the human brain is that every human has the same brain. It doesn't matter if you're an engineer, you have mirror neurons that get turned on and then get turned off when people get analytical. So the tenets of being able to move people, I think, are the same no matter what. In fact, here's an interesting thing. So one of the studies I talk about in my book was a study done at the University of Tokyo. A professor wanted to find out if you could take some of the most serious, literal-minded students he could find and make them more creative. So he got them all together and he gave them an assignment, which was to draw an object. And they were everyday household objects. There were teapots, there were flower vases. And culturally, the disposition of this crew was to be very literal in their rendering. I will try to get this teapot as accurate as possible, verisimilitude. So he went through that first thing, and he had, hundreds of sketches of these household objects that looked like the household objects. He then divided the group into two, because this is what scientists do, and he gave one of the groups exposure to the most funky, contemporary, abstract, expressionist art available. Spend some time feeding on this diet of abstract expressionism. And then he had both groups go back and do the same task. Now, interestingly, the group who was exposed to the modern contemporary art, they took the training wheels off. Their art was funky, it was interesting. These weren't teapots like any teapot you saw on a kitchen counter. It's simply being exposed to creativity made them more creative. But that's not the kicker to the story. He then took all of this art that all of the students had developed and gave it to a committee of great, successful artists. And he said, I just want you to judge the quality of this stuff. What's good, what's bad, what's this and that. And it was a real diverse crew he had on the jury. And all the abstract expressionist stuff won. It won. I mean, it's one study, but it holds out the hope that you could actually make people more creative by exposing them to funky creativity. And going back to your earlier question about how do you sell and how do you pitch, I think there's a lesson there. Show up like the awesomeness you want your audience to buy. I have no idea if that's an answer to your question,
No, I like
but
that. Well,
it's a
I
study
think,
that I love.
I think the key learning there, for me anyway, is unrelated to just this topic, but the more you expose yourself to anything, whether it's a different point of view around politics, which
Right.
we talked a lot about, or you expose anything that you're continuously learning about, I think expands your brain, right? And so
Right.
if you can surround yourself with different people, and one of the things I have been trying to do is surround myself with more creative people in
Yeah.
my job. So I work in
Yeah.
marketing, but I'm the one who brings bullet points, and it took me a while to learn to not put bullet points up there because everybody can argue that.
Yeah.
Right, or like you set the grid, so it's like.
So I've got
minimize that a little
in
bit.
my book, one of the exercises that I propose is every day to experience some sort of outburst of other people's feelings and emotions. I call them muse snacks. And in the appendix of my book, I've got 30 days of muse snacks, things that I recommend you experience. And it could be a haiku, it could be a video, but it's just something that takes you just a couple of minutes each day just to try to become more fluent in the language of feeling. So the two daily exercises I recommend is that, eat a muse snack every day, but also find an opportunity every day to express a feeling, right? And the advice I give people is to begin a sentence with the words, I feel. And if you can do that in a business meeting, even better. I think you'll quickly see that the way the room readjusts around you is very interesting. In a place where people are making arguments and relying on data, and say, I feel like this is boring. I feel like this is awesome. Just this simple act of expressing an emotion not only gets you more comfortable expressing that emotion, sets you on your way to being a muse, but it rearranges the world around you.
I guess the last one that I have for you is, you talked a lot about the importance of expressing emotion, but I think it might be good to kind of get it on the record of like, how does leaders model that behavior for those they're leading?
Yeah, it's so important. It is very fashionable in corporate environments for leaders and managers to talk about how human and authentic they are. And yet the instinct to chase feelings away from conference rooms is strong. We say, think about this clearly, weigh the pros and cons. The language we use is analytical at its core. And when people get excited, when they get passionate, when they get aroused, well, take a deep breath, we'll calm down, well, let's think about this rationally. I think the two most terrible words in the history of humanity. No, but two very terrible words are chill out, right? That dousing of a person's natural emotional response to something. I remember at General Mills, I told our CEO that I loved sons and I loved daughters, but maybe we should have bring yourself to work day. Because most people left themselves in the car where they were singing songs and being themselves. They swipe in and they show up as work self, not self. And I think managers, leaders, all of us have a responsibility in corporate environments to unleash the humanity. And you do that in really simple ways. You do it by starting your sentences with I feel. You do it by asking people, how do they feel about this or that? It's a real disarming question. People aren't used to being asked it. You ask them about their weekends. You ask them if they liked Fleabag or if they liked Veep or what movies they saw. And you sort of fill the space with as much feeling as possible. And I think your company will be more successful. In fact, I know it will be. Bain & Company did a study a few years ago where they looked at hundreds of companies around the globe. And they concluded that an inspired employee is 2 times more productive than an uninspired one. And we don't need Bain & Company to tell us that, right? We feel it. When we're stoked, we'll work nights, we'll work weekends, we'll pour our best selves into the work that we do. That's the inspiration advantage, the real, concrete output that is more effective when it's fueled by inspiration than when it's fueled by the thinky gasoline.
Awesome. With that, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. Right.